Dorothy Callan, who was the first in the conversation, not new to Ennismore, but new to us here tonight. For the past 2 weeks, we've been looking at various topics in Scripture, and last week we started the series of on Dominican spirituality, and tonight Dominican mission, and next week the Dominican praying with art in art. So tonight we welcome Sister Veronica, Rafferty, a native of County Derry, as she said, Shemmasini country. Ronnie worked for a short time in Ireland, teaching in our Dominican schools, and then for the last 50 years has worked in Argentina. Our Dominican sisters are working in South Africa and in Louisiana and also in South America. So Cork, or Ireland in particular, has a strong connection with Argentina without going into the history of it. We have a long connection historically. But in a very particular way, if I may mention one Cork man, a Fermoy man, a former friend of mine, Patrick Rice. Patrick Rice was a priest who worked in Argentina, ended up being arrested and tortured, and subsequently left the ministry, and he and his wife worked in human rights, both in Venezuela and in Argentina. And I like to remember Pat tonight in particular through Ronnie, and not only Pat, but also all like Pat, who have literally given their lives for our brothers and sisters, not only in Argentina, but throughout the world. So through Ronnie's presence tonight, somehow to myself, in a very real way, the memory of Patricio Rice, as he was called, Patrick Rice, our fellow Corkman, is alive and well. The church in Argentina has given us, Francis has given us many other people too, less famous. So we, I suppose the Dominicans, are very proud, and if I may say that, and honoured that our sisters have ministered there and are ministering there. And it is a great privilege tonight that in a way Ronnie represents that whole dream of the sisters, that whole reality of their gospel life in Argentina, and in particular their company of women, which is Ronnie's topic tonight, walking with women in Latin America. So Ronnie, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Stephen. Right. So thank you, Stephen, for the invitation to share my experience in Argentina and Latin America. I gather it was Father Jordan O'Brien who suggested that you might invite me to do this. And I would like to say at this point that Jordan, who's now based in Galway, was actually a huge support to me in the work with women. When he was a parish priest, he always organised groups and invited me up, and then if we had a workshop in another city, he would bring the group and come and participate just like one more. He was wonderful. So I will begin with this. Beginnings have a way of arriving quietly, come with hints and whispers. They have with them a promise that is undeniable. And yes, I said yes, I will, yes. That's a quotation from James Joyce, so it comes through as a thread through my talk. Life's way of saying yes, yes, and something new can and will happen. In the unfolding of time, budding, flowering around us, and more important, within us. Our beginnings are merely one more step in our growth, one more chance to become more completely who we were meant to be. So preparing this talk has obliged me to return to the beginnings of my mission in Latin America, and especially my work with women, and to discover the moments when new things began to happen. Of course, this has been a salutary experience, filling me with wonder and gratitude at how often I was pulled forward. Taking the step of volunteering for Argentina began when Sister Catherine de Ricci came to visit Wicklow, where I was teaching Maths and Science. She was recruiting for a recent foundation by Taylor City Galway in Buenos Aires. So on St. Patrick's Day, a few months later, I went up to Cabra to offer my service to the congregation priors, volunteering to go to Argentina. She told me that 2 other sisters had already volunteered, so my heart sank. It didn't sound very promising. But She phoned me in May and she asked me, "Are you still interested in going to Argentina?" I said, "Yes," very enthusiastically. So at other times in my life, I haven't responded quite so enthusiastically to a call, but to that one, I did. So the title Walking with Women in Latin America suggests that I would rove over a wider context than Argentina. And it is true that I have walked with women in other parts of Latin America. I may mention it at the end of the talk if you're not all fallen asleep by then. I walked with Dominican sisters who are teachers, theologians, artists, and with Dominican laity, and with groups of women whose dignity they were promoting. However, I will focus on where my main apostolate took place, which was in Argentina. So here we go, the map of Argentina. Alright, so I'd work and point out. The smallest province in Argentina is called Entre Rios, and that's where Paraná, the city of Paraná is. It is the size of Ireland. Now there are 22 provinces in Argentina, so you can figure out it's a good bit. It's a huge, huge country. So I'll show you where Entre Rios is, which means between the rivers. If I can point out. Do you see that little brown one up there? Mm-hmm. Right? That's it there, up from the board. There's Buenos Aires, that yellow, and just above it is Entre Rios. So it's up the river Paraná, flows out into Buenos Aires, and it's called the River Plate when it arrives at the port of Buenos Aires. So perhaps when you hear Argentina, you might immediately think of Pope Francis. As Stephen did, he thought of Paradise as well. Or you might think of the popular song, "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." Or if you like soccer, you'll think of Maradona and
of
Messi. Lionel Messi, please. So closer to home, you might know of some Dominican friars who worked there since 1965. Finian Lynch, who's over in Pope's Quay, Dermot Clifford, Jordan O'Brien, who I mentioned, Tom Monaghan, Gus Champion, and many others who are already deceased. So I can tell you that I was by no means the first Irish person to arrive in Argentina when I got there in 1972. The most famous one was William Brown. He was the founder. He was from Foxford, County Mayo, the founder of the Argentine Navy, as my friend here was able to tell me, in the early 1800s, and is revered annually with wreaths at different spots. This is where Rosario honoured him. I was present at that ceremony. You see the piper and the flag, and the square was named Plaza Irlanda in the city of Rosario. Right? And then further, we have Mary Robinson during her visit, laid a wreath as well. It's all part of the protocol when they go out there. You can see the Marines there standing to attention because he was the founder of the Navy. So. I would like to mention a few other distinguished emigrants from Ireland, such as John Plunkett, strong connections to St Oliver's family, who arrived in 1840 in his own boat with his family. His descendants live in Bahia Blanca, though the one I know best lives in Rosario. You would have heard the news recently then of another Irishman, Edward Shackleton, who led a voyage of exploration, and the ship Endurance has just been discovered 100 years later. Right? Another famous okay. So, let's see, then was Father Fahy. Will I get Father Fahy now? Yes, sorry, I dropped the page before I should. Directly related to my story, we're getting nearer to my arrival in Buenos Aires. There was Father Dominic Fahy, who organised a migration from County Longford and County Westmeath during that same decade, and in the years after the famine. Many Irish got land from the government. If they rode a horse during the course of a whole day, they could claim that land free of charge. So many of them did it. And these ranches were located deep in the interior, and there were no schools for minors. So the Irish immigrants set up boarding schools in Buenos Aires. There was one for boys, and it was called the Fahy Institute, and one for girls, it was called the Keating Institute. And it was in the heart of Buenos Aires, right? That's a view of the River Plate and the centre of Buenos Aires. And that is a front view of the school where I arrived in 1972. Keating Institute, as it was known then. Across the road from it was the Irish Passionist Foundation, Santa Cruz, so became well known at the time of the dictatorship. And 2 blocks away, there was a school run by the Irish Sisters of Mercy. So I was living in a kind of a little Irish ghetto there when I arrived first, which was very nice. 2 of the sisters helped me to learn Spanish, 2 of the Mercy sisters. Now we move on then to influence. Does Medellin, Colombia mean anything to you?
Yes.
Medellin, right. It was a conference of Latin American bishops which got together to see how they could apply Vatican II to their continent, right? And 10 years later, we have Puebla, Mexico, 78. Now, these documents had a huge influence on us. We sat down in the community to study them, right? A strong theme was a preferential option for the poor and marginalised. Of course, this was classified as leaning towards communism by the military elite that in 1976 took over the government of the country. So my early years were marked by guerrilla warfare, just as at the same period in the north of Ireland there was guerrilla warfare. But the reflection and the study of those church documents were the source of a new focus in my ministry and pastoral work. I stopped teaching English in a middle-class school in the heart of Buenos Aires. I heard the call of the poor and was able to walk the talk, as the saying goes, by moving to Paraná in 1975. The word Paraná in Guarani means the river that is like a sea, and it really is like a sea. It's absolutely huge, not to mention islands and tributaries all around. So I moved there in 1975, where our Irish Dominican friars had responsibility for the parish in the outskirts of the city. So we and 2 other sisters and myself started a community there, and we each took on the poorest barrios in the parish. Mary O'Byrne went to the city dump, and Bridge went somewhere else, and I went into Barrio Las Flores, as it's called, the flowers. I opened and ran a creche there that had been built by the municipality, and it had never functioned. This barrio was featured in an on-rock documentary when Joe Dunn and Peter Lamass came out and did some filming. It was on TV, I believe. So during the 10 years that I lived there in Paraná, I got enculturated. I learned Spanish, I learned to play the guitar, and sing the Argentine folk songs. Now, I did not learn the tango. That's a little bit more complicated, I'm sorry to say. So now we come on, I have 10 years there, we come on now to working with women particularly, okay. Because you might wonder, am I getting to it? So I had a sabbatical year then, 84, 85. My father died at the end of 84, and I came home and stayed for a year. And during that time, my mindset underwent a massive transformation. It was absolutely massive. Talk about beginnings, new things happening. One thing was I learned co-counselling, re-evaluation counselling. The other was I studied feminist literature. My friend Molly Rogers gave me a book, or a pile of books this high, and I worked my way through them. The study of all the fairy tales, Sleeping Beauty and all the, and Discipleship of Equals, Elizabeth Johnson, Elizabeth Schuster Fiorenza, Rosemary Houghton, Rosemary Ruther, all these people. And so I was mulling over this, and I remember talking to a Dominican brother, friend of mine, and I said, how would you go about, applying some of this? And he said, well, you'd at least have to get a doctorate in theology if you wanted to do anything in the church, have any sort of weight to your voice. I said, well, sorry, not going there. So it wasn't quite realistic. So I opted instead to work in society. Didn't take on the church. So in my return to Argentina in 1986, I made promotion of women central to my pastoral work, using the tool of co-counselling. By then, I was based once more in Buenos Aires, but this time on the periphery, where all the services were lacking. No telephone, for example, we had to take a bus to the nearest urban centre to phone Ireland or to pick up letters in the post office. Urgent messages came to us through the kindness of the Irish Christian Brothers, who had a ministry to the poor in the area. So I joined with a group of women in this area. These women were already known to and were meeting with Sisters Anya Killen and Sister Dorothy Callanan, prayer present, so who had begun that community, that parish. And I began to introduce co-counselling into their meetings. Then a Kairos moment occurred that meant a huge change in my way of walking with them. A hint and a whisper, as Joyce described it. This was a vital step forward in that journey. In the local town one day when I went to fetch the post, I saw a poster in a window outlining the plight of women who suffered domestic violence. I took a note of the points listed there, and in 1993 made them the basis for a 10-meeting programme in booklet form. One, I have a photo of it, but there's a copy of it sitting over there, that would serve many groups of women for many years and in many parts of Argentina and even as far as South Africa. It was very simple, so that women without much schooling could use it to run groups once they got the training, co-counselling skills. So I began a healing ministry backed by other sisters in our region with women who were victims of domestic and other kinds of violence. And this is the first group of leaders here: Adela, Alicia, Joan, that's Joan Shanahan, who's an aunt of Kevin's, right? Mm-hmm. That's her, the tall person there with the reddish hair. Alicia, who was the one who was a leader in co-counselling in the city of Buenos Aires. Myself and Doña Sara, we called her Doña Sara. She was of Indian Toba of origin. So that's the copy of the book that I got printed. Mujeres Aprendiendo a Ayudarse. And it was called MAPA, M-A-P-A, right? So that was the key to this becoming a program and having a huge influence. So I'm going to explain some of the content and some of the theory behind it in detail because of the context now in Ireland after the death of Aisling Murphy. I think it created a new awareness of what women have to suffer. So let me see now what we got next. Yeah, these are the few of the rules on counselling which we incorporated into this little booklet. So you pay complete and caring attention to the person you're working with, looking at them all the time. You don't look around the ceiling and say, get distracted at birds passing by or anything like that. You give your full attention. Do not interrupt or give advice or make comments, which we tend to do in conversations. It's almost automatic. No, what you need to do is this. That I had that experience too, and we go off on our track, right? So we sort of pull out the plug on our own particular issues and situation and pay full attention to the person. So, right? To contradict the distress, I'll describe that later on when I'm describing the scriptural side to this. Idea is that sometimes it's the opposite. If someone is very fearful, we will they would say, I'm so brave, I'm a very brave person. You can get them to. The next word is to encourage discharge with these phrases that help to contradict the distress. They produce discharge, either laughing or crying or anger or trembling with fear and so on. And then we share equal times, so that it's equal. There's a partnership. It's not that, the psychologist and the client, it's appears to people on equal footing. And finally, the most important maybe of all, keep it to yourself. Don't repeat anything that you've heard in that session. Right? So those are the golden rules for listening. And it's just interesting how often Pope Francis uses the thing about learning to listen. And with the Synod program, it's the same story over and over and over again. This whole thing of listening has become greatly to the fore in any kind of developing relationships with people. Right. I don't know what's next, why there's so many gaps here. We're getting here. I don't know what some of these groups, that's a youth group that's developed. I wrote, as well as the pink booklet for women, I also wrote ones for young people and for men, and for, gradually. So this was a youth group that developed out of one of those programs. Now, this is where what I took down in the from the shop window, the poster. These are the points, which were the points of the 10 meeting program that I developed. The first experience of a woman who is a victim of violence is that she is alone, because one of the tendencies of the violent partner is to isolate her from her family, put her off from her friends, and sometimes that she has no one that she can tell about it. Or if she does, it's even worse because he will get angry with her for telling someone. So this whole this is the contradiction. I was trying to explain that term before. I am not alone. To the distress, which is I am alone. Yes? I am not guilty. This is very common that a man makes her feel guilty. Why does he beat her? Because she is at fault. She hasn't cooked properly, she hasn't had it in time, she hasn't whatever it is, he makes her feel that she's guilty. Actually, she has provoked him, right? So this thing of I am completely innocent, I'm not guilty. I can is a huge one. This is the whole thing of empowerment. I can, because all that isolation and that sense of being blamed for what is happening in the situation is a sense of disempowerment. I'm helpless. I can't get out of this. This is just, I'm losing a sense of myself. So I can is a huge one. And I have a lovely experience of that. In 2018, when we were celebrating 50 years of being in Argentina, we held events in the north and in Paraná and in Buenos Aires, 3 different places. In the north, this lady came up and gave me a big hug. She said, "Sister, did you know I have now been received as a lawyer?" I said, "Really?" "Yeah." And she said, "Thanks to I can. Thanks to yo puedo in Spanish." She had used that to get her, to encourage herself to keep going and get her, finish her education and get a title. So, next one, I am wonderful. This is obviously lack of self-esteem, which is part of, the treatment, ill treatment, being consistently treated and minimized. I am wonderful. Now, we have some great contradictions for this one. One of them, which the women loved, was, why should they build me a monument? And what kind of a monument would it be? What it would be like? And they really go to town on this, and it's terrific for self-esteem, right? So, you getting tired now? Do I need to give you a break? No, right, okay. So number 5, the real me. This is when I can show I don't have to put on any sort of a mask or pretend I'm something. The real me. They like this one too. The real me, and they come out with all the stuff that they haven't been able to say. What do I really want? This is a question of setting objectives, setting goals in their lives. And this woman who became the lawyer, she obviously, in early sessions, early on, said, I'm going to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. And set herself the target. So this is one good exercise too. And number 7, this is to encourage people when they've made small steps in getting out of their disempowerment or in getting back some self-esteem. However small it is, it's worth it. And it's to be celebrated. Right? Number 8, what's missing in my life? What else could I go after that would, bring some happiness, bring some peace? Number 9, I can listen to others. In other words, I'm not just helping myself. I can also apply this and give other people time and listen to them. And finally, I can share my new life with other women. Right? Now, something seriously has happened here in terms of where I want to go next. So, if you pardon me for a moment, that next. I want to show you the scriptural references that I used for these. Yeah. And for some reason they've got rubbed out. So, sorry about that. But I leave you with those 10. But what I'd like to do now is just, I don't know what has happened here with this. Some of the photos are gone. Yeah, it's in the problem for some reason. Okay. I'll leave this one here. This one. I'll leave this one in place. So what I went after then next was the scripture. The scripture that would enhance and enrich and bring a faith dimension into this work, into this transformation that was going on. So, here we go. I am not alone. What would you suggest?
I'm always with you.
Which text of the scripture?
I'm always with you.
Yes. Well, I took the widow of Nain. Jesus showed much love for her, for she faced a life of loneliness and abandonment. Right? Her husband first, and then her son had died. And in Jewish society, that meant she was totally unprotected. So he restored the young man to life, restoring her to a place in society, and rescued her from a life of loneliness. So in the listening session, the women are encouraged to mention all the possible sources of company and support that may be there in their lives if they reach out. That's the first one. The second one is not my fault, I'm not guilty. No tengo la culpa in Spanish. So women are made by their abusers to feel guilty. It is her fault that he has to beat them up. And that somehow they deserve this awful treatment. Jesus did not condemn the adulterous woman when the adulterous, I presume, elders brought her before him to test him. Besides being hypocrites, they were not too concerned about the woman's feelings. This has to be one of my favourite scenes in the Gospel. How Jesus shows us how to be a new model of a human being. So one of the expressions that I suggest to use in the listening session in this particular one to contradict the distress is, I am more pure and innocent than the Virgin Mary. They love that. They love that. A lot of women here like it too, you see. When people laugh, it's because it is touched. Right? So we go on to number 3. No, this is not number 3. What's going on here? Number, yes, I can is next, right? Yo puedo. Any woman in such a situation feels powerless, and by repeating the phrase I can and completing the sentence with some skill or talent, they're reminded of their potential. So, yes, I tell the story about 2018 then, the lawyer lady. For the gospel text, I chose the healing of the woman bent over for 18 years, who was empowered by Jesus in the synagogue. You remember that? Well, sure. We had a wonderful group of Dominican theologians meet one time, all women theologians, for 2 or 3 days on this text. It was absolutely wonderful. And we had a woman Dominican artist called Thomas Swanson, who painted on cloth 18 little pictures of this woman as she progressively got more and more and more bent over until she was completely bent over. And then the very last one is a little, her eye is round and she's looking up at Jesus. And then in the middle, the big picture, she put her hands up and praising God. It's a beautiful, beautiful painting. So I wish I could have got a copy to show you, but I don't have it. Go on to number 5 then, the real me. The real Myrtha, the real Mary, the real blank or whatever name. Victims of domestic violence cannot show or be their real selves. The control exercised by a violent abuser is total. She has to tiptoe around to avoid another outburst. So the woman with the hemorrhage is a good example of someone who secretly wanted healing but was ashamed to say so in public. Unlike the Syrophoenician woman whom we had very recently, or the blind men or the lepers who called out and shouted out loudly and made a nuisance of themselves. She didn't. Jesus commended her faith and got her to speak out in front of everyone, breaking that taboo of showing herself. Then we come to the goals in life. Number 6, my goals. A life without any other goal than avoiding the next explosion or attack cannot have much to recommend it. Rather than a life, it is an endurance test, walking a knife edge. So at this stage of the program, we introduce the idea that a woman can take control of her life and set herself a goal, however small, that would improve her life. You may find it amusing that I chose the example of the mother of James and John for this. She set her sights really high for her 2 boys. Her ambition was extreme and we're inclined to scoff at her. However, with the women, we encourage any positive proposal at all, even if it is only to dress better or get her hair done. Some, of course, go back to school and achieve even 3rd-level degrees or diplomas, and many have to make the decision to leave their partners. So the smallest effort is worth a lot. You could probably guess this would be the widow's mite, right? The struggles these women have are tremendous, and they need encouragement for every little progress they make. So in this meeting, time is given to listen to each one tell of small achievements, and congratulating and applauding them as they do so. I think of Norma Pessoa, who arrived in such distress. I have a photo to show you what I did have, but alas, about half of them seem to have got blown away in the course of the evening. Norma arrived at one of our workshops in great distress, crying. She couldn't stop crying. It's an alcoholic husband to beat her when he was drunk. She cried so desperately that I thought, she'll never make it. On the contrary, she has got to give up the drink. She went on to study herself, achieved 3rd-level degree, and became a leader. Is now one of the most active leaders that we have for other women. So I love the text where Jesus praises the tiny contribution of the widow in the temple. Her pennies were worth more than all the fat checks or handsome contributions made by others. And this was encouragement indeed. So, how are you all at this stage? Falling off the chair? It's a bit detailed, isn't it? So, just do these last few quickly. What's lacking in my life? Well, what about the marriage feast of Cana? What was missing? What was missing? There was no wine. There was no wine. So I thought that was just great for finding what was missing for the fun. So what would give him a fuller life? What would enhance it in some way? So asking for support, developing friendships, getting a job, etc., and then taking a first step in that direction. So Mary saw what was missing at the wedding feast of Cana. They had no wine, it has run out, and she sought help in finding a solution. She relied on her loving son for that, and Jesus provided the solution in abundance. Remember, 600 litres only. So finally, then, learning to listen to others. So here I have Mary in Bethany, who sat at the feet of Jesus and listened, and he praised her for doing that, rather than running around doing the cooking and getting a lot of food ready. He said, one place enough. One is enough. So finally, then we motivate them, and that's the resurrection scene where Jesus sends Mary off to share the good news of the resurrection with the disciples. Right? Now. So I have a few more then individual photographs just to share with you of some people whom we have helped over the years. Yeah. This is the story of family from Moreno. There is Mary, mother in the purple top, her daughter Veronica over standing beside her, and Adriana, who's completely blind, a little thin girl in front, and myself. And a picture of the Sacred Heart behind. And that was taken when they were still living in a little shack. And Mary's husband was alcoholic, very irresponsible, eventually left them. And Mary worked as a seamstress, many hours. Her neck was always sore from so many hours of sewing. And Veronica was to be born on the 25th of May, which is a national holiday in Argentina. And the nurses wanted the day off. So they said, just take some Valium and hold on to that baby until the next day. So Veronica was born with diminished brain power, right? She can walk, she can talk, and so on, but she's not able to be independent. The other case was Adriana was born a few years later, 7-month-old baby. She put in an incubator. We did not cover her eyes. The light damaged her eye, and she was completely blind. She wasn't born blind, she was made blind. And Mary's life was threatened. If she dared to complain or make any complaint, we would kill you if you did. It was a military regime at that time. So this family are very dear to me because I'm the oldest. Adriana is the same age as one of my nieces, and that family adopted her and sent out money constantly. And with that and help from one of the Christian brothers, we were able to get a house built on the same property. So eventually they were able to get rid of the shack they were living in and get a proper house made of bricks. And their life turned around. And Adriana, actually, her mother was absolutely devoted to her and learned Braille and taught her to read. And she also got 3rd level education. And she went to university for a time to teach people who were blind. And some smart guy began to abuse her and harass her and so on. So she just had to come and leave it. But very intelligent, and her mother really is amazing. So that's a family that I've accompanied for a long time. Here's another lady. This is in Rosario. The other family were in Buenos Aires. And the Barrio Triangulo, people have heard me talking about as much. It's because it's the shape of a triangle. It's along like a railway track. And there are about 120 families in it. And we started off a project of building. Now, Sandra's story is she's sitting there in a wheelchair. Her husband broke her back, beating her, and she's never walked since. And look at that smile in her face. This was when the community got together there, and we got some funds. That was the house she lived in, you see, just behind all these ziggy sort of things. You've seen that sort of shack in favelas and so on around the world, So they're the group of volunteers gathering on a Sunday to get the cement ready and start building her new house. And here's her new house. What do you think of that? Isn't that beautiful? She thinks it is absolutely fabulous. It might be as nice as some of the mansions in Cork, but it certainly was a huge up for her. So Sandra is very grateful for that, and for all the Irish people who actually helped to make it possible for her. Here we go to Barrio Triangle again. This is another story, Elda, whom I'm standing beside there. And we're standing on a ground where it was a bunker for drug distribution, and the neighbours demolished it. We got rid of them. And in that square they put up then a few swings for children. And over, you may be able to distinguish on the wall, they're painting a mural. And her brother was shot, Daniel. He was a great character. played the guitar and put on. He did devotion to Our Lady, and he would sing. And I saw him in July on the Feast of Our Lady Itati, and he was murdered in August, just shooting in the barrio where they lived. And at a month later, we were having a month's mind here, and the neighbours were painting a mural in memory of him on that wall, and I stood with Elda while she was, telling her grief again. And so again, there was a community dimension to that as well. So that's people. I think we'll leave what's left for the moment, and maybe just hold it there. So take a minute or two, maybe, just to see the impact of this work. I'm sorry some of the photos have disappeared. I was going to tell you about another woman called Mirta, but this may be enough there with Sandra and the Soria family and Ella. Okay, anybody like to start off the conversation?
Brian, what's the impact on the men? Given the stereotype of a macho culture.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I hadn't gone very far in this, maybe a year or so, when some of the husbands came to me and said, "Have you got nothing for the men?" They thought these groups were doing great things for their wives and teaching them to listen. Can you imagine the difference that made? I remember one woman saying, when my husband comes home from work, I just start blabbering about all that went on. And I've learned not to do that. Let him come in, tell me how his day was, and then I'll tell. She said the difference it has made to her religion. Okay. Well, anyway, on the basis of that, this kind of husband approached me and said, "What have you?" So I did out. I spent 2 years actually meeting with men, a group of men, and I got to know a psychologist in Buenos Aires who specialised in working with groups of men. He was employed by the municipality. His name was Raul Mattiossi, and he brought me in one time to the group that he worked with, and his policy was making face up to it. The big thing was that all pretend to put on a front, and very often violent men are actually very charming. People who beat up their wives in private, I mean, not violent, but they put on a very charming thing. People go, "What? You beat up?" No. So his policy was, come on, say it as it is. Say it as it is. And anyway, I always joked with him because he left me one time on my own with 15 of these violent men when he went off to. Somebody new was coming in and he wanted to inscribe them and get them enrolled, and he left me to deal with them. Well, I listened to them because I had learned to listen, and they were dying to talk, and so on. But in fact, in Argentina, there's more domestic violence than there was before. There's almost a woman murdered. The peak, the cycle of violence gets gradually more and more intense. Every year I got material from Canada and from New Zealand, and that's the tendency as it gets worse, and ends very often in murder. And in Argentina, almost one per day is murdered, each year. And recent years, it's just, whether it's now reported or not, I don't know why, but it seems there are more. So it's very, very slow. It's a cultural thing that's very, very deep. And to me, it goes back to Eve and Genesis, blaming women. I always go back to Eve and can't we get rid of Eve? Can we take it out, that myth out of Genesis and rewrite it? That was one of the first books I read. It was called The Recreation of Eve. And it goes back to that because it's built in that men are superior and that women are guilty of can be blamed for things that go wrong. So the impact on men, of course, then there's a lovely group we started. I came across a priesthood, the new masculinity. There was some group in the States, I think, and they're working on a new model of being, manly, being masculine, and that's wonderful. That's really what's needed. rather than start correcting things, propose a new model is far more effective, I think, is positive than simply, trying to chop away at this belief and that belief. Because one of the slides I had that seems to go missing was the circle of violence, and the words in the middle of it are power and control. That is really the origin of it. It's not about sexuality or about sex, it's about power and control. So you see it, the power of love and the love of power. Power makes you feel stronger than someone who's weaker than you, and you get a sense of power. I mean, they say a lot of the abuse of children, it's not to do with sex or the pleasure of sex, it's to do with a sense of power over someone who is weaker and defenseless. So that's to that power and control thing. That's why Jesus' message about serving, the least, make yourself the least if you want to be important. Be of service. That's the real ambition. That's real power, isn't it? Isn't it, Kevin? For your work, yeah. Serving and helping. I mean, that's power. That's real power. Yeah.
And if that's true, shouldn't women be very powerful? Because they're the ones.
But we are very powerful.
But there's no working out.
Look at what motherhood is, for in anyone's life. Of course, powerful. Try telling me something else.
What percentage of the population are Catholic or Christian of Argentina?
Well, I would say it's still like 80% faith-based. Even on the most frequented, church attendance, Palm Sunday apparently, 5% of people attend. So big, not into church going, no. But baptism, weddings not so much, funerals either. They wouldn't have mass at funerals, they wouldn't have mass at a wedding, but baptisms are still important, and first communions, yeah. But I remember meeting a man in Paraná, and he said to me, soy católico, I'm a Catholic. And I said, oh, I've never seen you at mass on Sunday. And he said, sister, I'm católico, pero no fanático. Yes, don't need to translate it. Católico, pero no fanático. Yeah. Okay.
Would they still have their own native, indigenous religion sort of hangovers like before Christianity? Like, would that impact upon the macho culture?
Yes, it's still there. I don't think they ever had a matriarchal, matriarchal societies have existed in history, but and there's always a lot less violence there and even in some African nations, they consult the women before going to war, before starting, conflicts. Why? Because the women would not want their sons to be killed. So they generally find a solution rather than going to war. But in the most of the indigenous women are definitely a secondary place. Yeah. I just tried to bring the indigenous into the picture here with this pashmina there, with that zigzaggy pattern.
Yes.
Is very much an indigenous sort of a reflection of their kind of artwork, weavings and so on. Yeah.
And just quickly, if I may just something, the question of women, you think of Argentina, you think of Los Madros and Desperados, the Plaza de Mayo, that women have been very strong opponents, say, of the military junta, and there were the voices of the disappears and, those paths work and all with them. So the women's, it always struck me that the women, maybe news through past, the women of Argentina were quite strong and brave and courageous, so as opposed to Chile or Nicaragua or Salvador, far up front and
yes.
out there.
Well, the figure of Evita,
Yes.
while it's probably maybe hasn't done her justice with the Evita musical thing, you know. It's all Don't Cry For Me. But it's, she actually became a model for many women, and she was far stronger than Perón, her husband. She moved things in Argentina, and she, you know, robbed the rich to give the poor. She was a Robin Hood, a female Robin Hood, you know. So the women in the Plaza de Mayo, yes, they have fought, women have fought, well, as from this motherhood thing, it's a strong motherhood thing, you know, claiming life for their children and their grandchildren. They're still searching for grandchildren of those who were imprisoned or murdered during the dictatorship from 76 to 82. Yeah, they have done wonders. And in the barrios, our Sister Noemi, again I quoted, she did her thesis as a social worker, her licentiate, on the leadership of women in the barrio. And the word was madrasa. Madre is a mother, but madrasa is a big mother, you know, a big, strong mother, madrasa. So she pointed out that Doña Sara, that it was there in the first photograph of the group as a leader, she was certainly one of them. She was amazing. She started off creche, started off this, you know, she was there. And many of the leaders in the parishes, it's all women, in the parishes. Yeah. Martin Hunter would tell you that, and the others who are out there.
Joan, I was very, I'm not quite sure how to say what I was, but the steps along the way that led you into that mission were really wonderful. And you must have been very wide awake to notice where you were being led. And I just like that very much. It's kind of a really contemplative way of living, even to see a notice in a window of what it might be saying to you. Little hints and whispers. Yes, hints and whispers, exactly. I know I have that gift of not being afraid to take a step where nobody's taken it before. That is true, and I can't write about the cosmic garden, you know, and so on. I set up this before I left, and people said, you're mad, you know, and went ahead. So, and even when I started with co-counselling, there was opposition. I said, what are you bringing something in from the United States, like it was a very big anti-American thing, you know. But then now all our sisters got involved in it, and you see, I always say this, I didn't set up groups, I didn't do a big job, I just drew up this plan, and they took it, they ran with it. Sister Teresa, Sister Eileen from Cork, by the way, and people like that, you know, they ran with it. And it came to, you know, implementing and organising, and they were just terrific. Is there anything similar running in Ireland now?
I would think there are many organisations defending women who are under attack. I would think so. And especially, you know, after Aisling Murphy. There was new awareness of those groups at, you know, rape centres and all these. They're all over the place. They're all over the place. Now, I don't know what I had the advantage that the Mercy Sisters gave me material from New Zealand. The New Zealand government made it a priority at one time to do something about domestic violence, and they had terrific videos for the men. They played a scene where a man reacted violently, and then they replayed it where he didn't, they put up these traffic lights, red, yellow and green, to warn, no, there's a warning, and they said, try it again, you know, and he took a different approach. And of course, the outcome was fabulous. So there was great teaching went on there, and they prioritised it, and they published a lot of the findings and evaluation of men who'd gone through those processes and had been really helped. And
I'm thinking Noreen O'Shea is here. Noreen is a good shepherd sister. They run the largest services for women in this area. So Noreen, do you want to say something about in answer?
It is, I suppose we've been involved from the beginning here in Cork in terms of homeless women and children, and then raising awareness about domestic violence back in the early 70s, where people were saying, oh, this is something that happens in England, and maybe in Dublin, but certainly not in Cork. So Mrs. Keane, you know, the Julius, she was very involved, and she used to train me around with her because we had evidence from Eden House that was happening. But, you know, it has been a long, slow journey, and now I think Helen McEntee is very exercised around making sure that there are enough refuges for people to be protected in emergencies, you know. I don't know, are there refuges in Argentina?
Oh yes. One of the jobs I had with the group when I got a group going was to go to the refuge at the Mercy Sisters, founded by the Irish Mercy. They still have it. What's this they call the Casa something? Casa de la Mujer, they call it, woman's house. And the people who were in there would come to meetings with us, and we did the program with them. It was a big help to them. Yeah.
But I mean, in the early days in Eden House, I remember men used to come banging on the door and said that we were the cause of the women leaving.
Yes.
If we weren't there, they'd stay at home.
Yes. Oh yeah. Never taking the blame. Yeah. No, one of in the cycle of violence, the thing is not admitting. You know, it's your fault. It's your fault. You're provoking it. I don't have a problem. You have the problem.
You know, you were saying that the violence is increasing, and you know, in terms of the exploitation of women and trafficking and all that, it is increasing. And one of the factors is pornography.
Right.
You know, because that's fueling. There's research done recently by Ruth Breslin in UCD about young children of 12 and 13 in schools, and the amount of pornography that they're being fed and consuming, and that so the education is very important.
Yes, around it.
And the counteracting this terrible influence, and parents not knowing this.
Yeah, it needs to be included now in any sort of sex education programs.
Yes.
All this, because it's so lucrative, the trafficking of human beings, trafficking of children and women, that it's so lucrative that of course it's like arms and drugs. It's just, they're going with it.
And I'm happy to be part of a group called ACT, which is Act to Prevent Trafficking. And we have managed to develop a program called Captives. So it has C and the ACT, Captives, for schools. It is a 4-video session that teachers can do in schools. It's just recently launched. So we hope that that will help to educate.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Although I think, you know, when you think of going to the cause, the root cause of things, rather than picking up the corpses coming down the river, you know, in this analogy of you keep, you know, you don't ask why are they going, why is it? So the why is really in that new image of male and female, or masculine and feminine, you know, presenting another model, you know. And of course, Jesus, he was something else. Think of him in an Arab context, how he treated women, you know, with such respect and with such care, you know. He turned it all around. So we have a model, but how to get that into the society, into common culture, you know. So we have to model it ourselves, thankfully. People here who are modeling it. Thank God.
The big challenge, I suppose, is with the decline in religion and then the upsurge in the online stuff that you can get, that you're trying to struggle, I suppose, to find a value system for everyone in society. whereas I suppose maybe 100 years ago there was a shared value system, and there was always on pain of sin and eternal damnation. That was kind of what guided people's behaviour. Now, there was always domestic violence, I mean, I think, as you said, from the start. But I think it's trying, at the moment, from what I'm hearing from it, is yes, you're dealing with the women at a very human level, and introducing God into it at the same time, so that they know they have they have a higher power to rely on to a degree, but yet at the same time they need to deal with the human issues, as you say, to kind of how to alleviate some of the violence that's going on in my home, by having some of these, I suppose, pointers to deal with it. But I wonder if the men realised that they'd have a much richer life, and it's trying to point that out, and indeed to the women, they'd have a much richer life if they can, or either leave the man that's causing undue violence on them, or working towards a better relationship. But you have to get the man on board as much as the woman. And it was interesting to say that there was a men's group as well.
Yes.
But I suppose it's very much on a human level that you're doing it, and then bring God into it when you can. But they have to get to a point, first of all, where they've worked out their own, I suppose, survival, I suppose.
It's a Herculean task, isn't it? Really.
I taught in a boys' school, and I was always aware. And we did get speakers in. This was a secondary school. But we did get speakers in to educate the boys. But indeed, I remember going to a talk where we brought parents in and being a good parent to a boy, which I do think is it's half the battle if you can, in their upbringing, to bring them along to some level of caring, of kindness, and as you say, it's not all about power and control.
Yeah. Being tough and being strong and having power isn't about imposing yourself on somebody who's weaker or keeping them down. There was a lovely example, I thought, of two brothers on the Late Late Show, the night of the toy show. Do you remember that? There were two little boys, and he wanted to be a disc jockey, the older boy, and the younger one. There was such a beautiful relationship between the two that I said, look at that. Instead of the big brother being the bully, and putting him down, it was just the opposite. It was just beautiful. I thought, so that model. I don't know whether we used to have drama groups who would go and do on the stage. We'd have a big crowd for this type of a subject, and they were great. They would represent it and then redo it in the way it should be. Another model. It's very good pedagogy.
And maybe some of the high-profile sports people. Males doing interviews where they show their vulnerability. I think that's very helpful too. Not about being macho.
Well, psychology helps because I think the understanding of emotion, that showing emotion is not weakness. Tough, stiff upper lip, and that rigidity. That as psychology develops, it helps men and women to see the importance of emotions and the role of emotions in our lives and so on. Not to have these prejudices. Oh, boys don't cry. Tough doesn't cry as well. This sort of rubbish.
Veronica, you said something about what's happening to the Dominican sisters now in Argentina. Who are they? What are they doing?
Yes.
Well, I had a lovely photo of the group. I was out recently. I got a visit back officially within the year, having left for good. And I had photographs of the sisters there. There are 2 communities of our sisters, most of whom are Argentine. There's only one, there are 9 altogether. One is Irish, Rach Fahy from Galway, and she's living with 2 of the younger Argentines, Anna and Nancy. And there are 2 sisters in the home who are 85 and 93. And then we have 4 sisters in the home. So it's 4 and 3 and 2 in the home. And their work is wonderful, really. Vicky goes out to the communities in her area, a lot of Paraguayan immigrants there, Bolivia and so on. And she's accompanying those communities, again, led by women, they're all led by women. And they're getting, community centres, and they're getting places which will give food to people who have nothing to eat. Merendero, there's one lovely one which the title is written on the house. This woman who runs it is called A Full Belly. Panza llena is the title of it. And so there's lots of that is needed. Simply, distributing food. Caritas helps a lot. Vicky does that. And then the sisters in the house have a lovely work with students who, for the first time in their families, are the first to accede to 3rd level education. And it's free in Argentina. It's free to go to university. It's free to go to secondary school. But there's 90% dropout rate in the first year of all those who have no backup. They've no table to study on at home. They've no books. They've no money for the bus fare and all that. So they drop out and they don't have the backup in around them. So we provide backup. There's the last 10 years, and many students have already achieved their degree. Yes, wonderful. It's called HAC, J-A-C, Jóvenes Abriendo Caminos, young people opening up ways. And we provide, at the back of the house, we've closed in a big patio area, and they can meet there. They prefer to meet in the house. They come right in, and every Saturday there are people to orient them, and arranged with the university for people to do their practicals with them, guiding them in their studies, showing them how to read and how to synthesize and anything at all that helps them to keep going. But it's mostly the moral and the supporting the friendship and so on. That's a lovely project. And those people are coming back to help a new group coming in. They're paying back, as it were, what they got. So we give them a little subsidy every month for bus fare and photocopies, things like that. What else is going on? Well, Noemi set up a centre for the disabled. She's a social worker, and that was called after Monsignor Angelelli. And they've modelled 3 other, there's a creche there, I think, and adult education. And then we have another centre which is all adult education. So I lived there once, it's a house we left free for this kind of work. So it's run by Dominican Family, lay group, and it's just terrific. What they're doing, they have adults can finish primary and can finish secondary, and people went out from County Derry to help build the classrooms on the 2nd floor. So I said, oh, there's the name.
Would that be for boys as well?
I'll give it a plug in, So people are very generous in responding, to appeals, both for funds and for help. Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
Would the students be both male and female, or that you support?
Oh, every yeah. So you mean the students?
Oh
yeah, men, women, boys. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And
that will
adults
impact
as
on
well.
That will impact on next generation. Then I suppose
Of course,
of course.
Yes, in fact, the man who's running the centre, the adult education centre, he's called Gonzalo, and he's a nephew of one of the women that one of our sisters got to finish her primary education. And she encouraged him, you see, all the way along. And he's hired by the government. He works in the Ministry for Social Development, and he's a terrific character altogether, Gonzalo. So they're all wonderful people. I wanted to mention, Kevin, your work with the music, and the listening. I was telling Kevin that because Kevin uses music, he's a musician, in his work as in mental health with people, and I was listening to, I want to tell you about it too,
importance of listening, but also including music in that, not just listening to people, listening to music. It's absolutely beautiful. We'll listen to a little bit of it now. A man called Malkin. What's the first name? Something Malkin. He's in Ubiquity University, and the number is, if you're interested in that particular program, you get it on YouTube, free. Ubiquity University, Humanity Rising, and it's number 433. Do you want to make a note of it? It's worth reading. Very beautiful little talk on listening. Listening in general, but he really does listening to music, listening to sound, listening to silence. Just beautiful. Gary Malkin. Mm-hmm. Number 433 in Ubiquity University, Humanity Rising. All the kind of things we discovered during pandemic. Oh, yes. Wonderful courses and things.
Any comments you want to be able to throw up before we go to close? Any quick remarks or comments?
Thanks, Veronica, that was great. Can I just ask you again, just a little bit about, you mentioned the cosmic garden, and I was curious how it came to be again, or how you... I know it's a little bit off the topic now again. But
yes, but it's maybe an example of stepping out into the unknown.
Just how the background, how you came across.
Yes, well, you may know that in Wicklow, our congregation has an ecology centre, and there Miriam McGillis did out a text to guide the story of the universe in a series of about 20 or 30 phenomena. All right, so they did designed a spiral where you can walk around that and walk through it to time and space, imagine it. So Martin Hunter did that course. And he came back to Argentina and he sent me up a text. He said, Ronnie, would you ever translate this into Spanish for me? It's the first time I'd seen it. He wanted to do it where he was living in Buenos Aires in the garden. He wanted to do the spiral thing. So I started translating it. Well, again, talk about, wow, I just blew my mind. I said, I've got to do this. I've got to do something with this. This is too marvellous to pass up. So I started doing it where we were living in a huge piece of ground. But it didn't belong to us. And I was kind of, I got the fencing done and I got this stuff. And then the abbot who owned the property, the benediction, he said, sorry, I don't like this stuff anyway, all this tree hugging stuff and all this cosmology, don't like it. But anyway, he said, it's too risky. You have no way of ensuring that things wouldn't go wrong. So then I found a lady with the same name as myself called Veronica, and she offered her garden. We started a little reading group, reading around at first, and she came to the reading group. She had a meditation centre, so she offered her garden. And before we knew, we had an artist and herself and the text. We chose 20 out of the 30 items and began with the Big Bang, and then the first stars and the galaxies and the solar system and the Earth. And so we did these with posters on a stand, right? And you could walk. We did a lovely walk, nicely planned, went round like that, like a snake. And then we came with no more room. We came to a wall. So there was no more room, and we said, oh, right, we'll paint the wall. We'll paint the rest of them on the wall. So next, dinosaurs, tigers, and all the whole, what's it? Cecozoic, what is it? Zoic, not coming. That period where the mammals all took over when they disappeared. The poor old dinosaurs were wiped out. The others emerged. So then it goes right around the corner, around the back of her garden, and around the walls, right around to this huge tree, the ombu, and we took out, the chimpanzee, and then Homo erectus, and then the fire, man with fire, and then the first farming community, and so on, right up to the 20th century and Einstein. We did put in Jesus. We put in Jesus as a baby in the crib, and just very simple. And everyone is so many years ago it happened, right? So many billion years, so many thousand years, etc. So it's a really interesting experience because with COVID and so many deaths in the town, people have come, with, laden with grief. They do that walk, that cosmic walk, and when they see that, every death, there's a new life, there's that process of life, evolving, keeping going, finding new ways and so on, it really has helped. It's become a therapeutic thing, which wasn't, I suppose initially it was like spirituality, it was, praising the Creator, helping our sense of wonder about the diversity of things, and like John Feehan does, if you've ever heard of John Feehan, he just opened people up to that, to all the wonder, diversity, creation, and beauty. And but anyway, it has this other effect as well now. It's still going on. I came away, and Veronica still it's in her garden, so she can't get rid of it. And she's using it, and she had meditation going anyway. So every walk ends with sitting in quiet, saying, I've walked through time, I've walked through space. What's all this about, The time to sit with it. It's just fantastic. Well, that's how it started. Talk about little hints and whispers. Martin Hunter sent me a text. Please translate. That's how it started. Is that all right, Kevin? So Kevin's thinking of doing one in West Cork.
Well, no, people in West Cork have heard and have really liked the idea.
Yeah.
There's someone in Ballydob actually who really wants to get some.
I must get you some photographs because the artist was really special. Alejo Diaz. Yeah, he did a few portraits of me at the same time, but that's another way. I got my photo taken with the chimpanzee. So I look good. I look good beside the chimpanzee. Yeah. Anyway, that's all. Is not quite on our topic, but what you're saying. So thank you for listening. I must say I enjoyed myself. And you were a wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Very receptive. And,
So, thank you very much. And as we're talking, I was thinking that the radical Dominican message in South America goes back a long time. We mentioned last week people like Bartolome de las Casas and the Montesinos and the Salamanca process. So in a sense, the Dominican voice, there's a very good statue of Montesinos that we're shouting.
yes.
And we're often asked by the order to remember that famous homily that he gave about the dignity of the indigenous peoples. So in a sense, without making the head very, very big, we are very grateful to the Carver sisters for your courage and for the fact that you are continuing that. It doesn't depend on this woman tonight here. She told us to the sisters and women are continuing that, and to the brothers there, to Martin and to others who were there as well. But in a way, your presence tonight represents them and represents a history bigger than you, Ronnie, if I may say. And the fact that you have continued it and been a voice that's kept that flame going, we are very grateful and very honoured for you and also for Dorothy for her work when you were there for those years, and for the whole pioneering work of the Carver congregation, because it's worth acknowledging tonight publicly on camera. I mean, the work of the sisters in setting up women's colleges, education for women, care for the deaf, and many other centres that they have done, and now working with refugees and asylum seekers with the Young Mothers Network. So for that great, radical gospel courage, we thank you that you represent that tonight. Thank you very much. We're honoured to have you. So next week we move to the men, the Dominican men. Frangelico, artist and Dominican brother. So Michael Dunleavy, one of our brothers who has done or is doing a doctorate on Frangelico, he will present art and prayer the Dominican way next Monday evening at 7:30. So please spread the word. We continue, and that will be the last of the 3 Mondays on the Dominican way. We then move into the area, a very relevant area, relevant to the Good Shepherd services, the area of homeless and housing. So we invite, my name is gone, Anne, I talked to her tonight, Anne will come on, and my name will come. A movement here in Ireland looking at it called A House for All. A House for All. So, and Fitzgerald, and is working as a barrister in Cork. And then followed by Brendan Ryan, former director of Cork Simon and still involved in the Islamic community, former senator. And Brendan will speak on a similar topic, but with a particular church angle on the last conversation of this academic year. So thank you for coming. We look forward to meeting you next Monday evening.
Thank you.